Hello and welcome back to another video. Today going to be talking about updates in racing games, how they're getting worse, and discussing whether we should care or not, and what could be done differently to make them better again. So essentially what's prompted this video is Forza Horizon 5's recent update 14, which is probably one of, if not the worst update to the game so far, if not the worst update to the series so far, including a story mode that nobody cares about and is almost exactly the same as all the others, and only one new car despite them selling it as having 4 new cars. Don't think it's just Forza though. Gran Turismo 7 just received its worst update to date, with 4 supposedly new cars and no track, which they had previously promised they would be adding. 2 of the 4 new cars to that game were effectively reskins of cars we already had, the Mazda MX-5 and the new Nissan GT3 car, and the other 2 cars, although I liked them, didn't exactly have mass appeal. Gran Turismo also promised us that we'd be able to sell our cars in an update a long time ago, and that ability still hasn't come to the game. The Crew 2 also has a habit of adding special edition reskins of cars, and then there's Need for Speed, who cancel all the updates because their studio got shut down by EA for seemingly no reason other than to develop a Battlefield game. Which is at least a reason, but it's still not really good enough. So these are the problems. Developers are getting increasingly lazy with updates and add either recycled vehicles that aren't new and should have been in the game from launch, or just basically reskins of existing vehicles which don't take much time or effort to make. So why would anyone think we shouldn't care about these problems, and how did games even get to this point? Let's wind back in time then to when games didn't have online features at all and therefore were never updated, which might seem strange when you're playing games in 2022 that not that long ago games didn't actually have online features, and even less long ago didn't really get updates, at least as regularly as we've come to expect them. The game you bought was essentially the game you bought back then, and the content included in the game was what you got. Simple, you knew what you were getting and the game was either good or bad. As time went on, online gaming became more and more mainstream. Developers started to have the great idea that their games could evolve through their lifespan. Updates could be used to patch any faults with games, and also brought new content to the games through downloadable content or DLCs along the way. Some of it was free, but mostly in those days a pack would release that was paid for to add to the base game, which was all well and good. You knew what you were getting, you paid for it, and it was added. No problems. Fast forward a number of years and all games are adding content post-release. We expect updates of increasing size and quality, and more frequently than ever before. We get to the point where there are monthly updates, and sometimes these include weekly introductions of new content, mainly cars, as we're talking about racing games here, but other games add new content in a similar manner. Eventually developers run out of new stuff to actually add, at which point they should probably just not add anything, or try and add things less frequently if they don't have enough new content to keep up the regular installments they promise. But instead what they do is remove content from previous titles on purpose, with the intention to reintroduce it later if they run out of ideas at some point, or simply can't be bothered to add anything new. Which I kind of understand. There isn't limitless new content to add, but then just don't add anything at all. Just don't add recycled stuff. As I said, this month in Forza we're getting 3 so-called new cars that aren't in fact new at all. They're all in Horizon 4, and the 4th car isn't much more than a reskin of a car they added a couple of series ago, even if personally I think that car is brilliant. It's not really different enough to count as a new vehicle. With Forza, I know it's not just cars being added, but another badly written story mode exactly the same as the previous ones that we can complete in under an hour doesn't really show much effort from the developers, especially when it doesn't even feature any new cars from the Donut Media people who are in it, who personally I find irritating. But if you're going to have a story including them, at least put their cars in it, not just cars that are already in the game. Not to mention the fact that the menus are super laggy in this story mode when you're upgrading a car, and that if you follow the route to one of the next locations for the next chapter, going through a speed zone, the speed zone then won't work in that subsequent chapter until you restart your game. And the Rocket Bunny kit's returning. They made a big deal out of this, and many speculated this was because new kits were coming alongside the old ones, which, by the way, they only took out of Horizon 4 so they could re-add to Horizon 5. But I kind of knew they wouldn't add any new kits with the way Forza's updates have been going recently, but it was still disappointing to have that suspicion confirmed, and many people were still kind of hoping Forza would add something new at least this time in the way of Rocket Bunny kits, and then, rather unsurprisingly, they didn't. Now, I'm not going to start defending Forza for 1 minute. If they've promised updates with new content, we should get updates with new content. And in 2022, when they can add new content so easily, they really should be doing, as that's what every game pretty much does these days. But part of the problem is kind of with us, the consumers. We have come to expect monthly updates full of new content when maybe we shouldn't expect them that frequently, although that's partly because games have kind of promised that to us. But maybe we should just expect updates less frequently, more like some of the earlier updates to games before this monthly and weekly style thing started being done. Developers certainly feel they have to add so-called new content, even if it isn't new, to keep us happy, when in fact a lot of us would prefer they just didn't. Just put it all in at launch. We're not as stupid as you think. Maybe some players who didn't play the previous games you might be tricking, but most of us know that this content isn't new. We can see immediately when new content is in fact recycled. We don't even mind not getting updates. The problem is continuing to update the games with cars labelled as new when they're in previous titles and only taken out to reintroduce. Just don't promise weekly new content if you can't deliver it. Now, Forza is of course the worst offender for this, because they literally just add cars back in that were in the previous game and clearly only removed so that they could be fill-in content in the new game. Just add it all at launch. Add new stuff as and when you can, but don't force yourself to add a new car, for example, every week. Just put the recycled stuff in at the beginning, because it's not new, and then add new stuff as and when you actually can, and when you've, well, finished it, basically, rather than rushing content into the game that's clearly just reskinned or recycled. 1 new car a month, for example, would be fine if you didn't add 3 more recycled cars alongside it to pretend it was new. Just add the new car. So we shouldn't expect new content constantly as games promise it, but equally games shouldn't add so-called new content if it's just recycled. What we don't like is the developers lying to us, because we're not as stupid as they think. Or put more effort into patching problems and issues in the games, like connectivity, or leaderboards that are, well, cheated, and other glitches and bugs which are plaguing games such as Forza Horizon 5. So maybe don't try to add updates every month. However, we don't want no updates at all either these days. We need a reasonable number of them to keep games alive, which is where the other end of the scale is with games like Need for Speed, who, as I said, cancelled all updates because EA closed down a studio, and they have a habit of doing this all the time, which is rather irritating. Anyway, at least there was a reason for them not updating that game, but it was easily avoidable and killed the game off very soon post-launch, which is the problem if you don't update games these days. And there lies another problem. Games are releasing unfinished and not working properly because developers know they can just fix it later after we, the consumers, have played it for a bit and run into all of the problems ourselves. It wouldn't take much for the developers to properly test a game pre-launch, but why would they if we can just run into the problems for them? This means that when games don't get updated, problems like this stay in for the lifespan, and people get bored and move away from the game because every other game will be getting updated. Developers used to be much more careful because they knew a game would stay forever in whatever state it released. And that's before we even get started on the paid DLCs of today and things that are included with Ultimate Editions of games and such. Take Forza's car parts as an example, as it's probably the worst offender. Again, they don't tell us in advance what's in it, but we've come to know the formula. The cars in it will be new to the series, and we pay to access a given number of vehicles, with usually 1 or 2 being added a week in the past 2 games, for example. These cars are then usually in the subsequent game from the start and are not paid for. This has always been how it worked, until, and you probably know what I'm going to say here, that Porsche. You know the one, the 911 Sport Classic that has been a paid add-on in Forza games 3 times now. If this is the first time you've bought it, then fair enough. It's the first time I've had access to it, for example, but some people have bought all of these DLCs and have therefore paid for it 3 times, and a car that you've just recycled from a more than 12-year-old game probably at this point, Motorsport 4, really shouldn't be paid for in a 2022 game, whether you've driven it before or not. And I think that's probably why developers think they can get away with this. Because of the growing number of new players, Forza, for example, has had huge influx of new players in its growing player base, many of whom will be too young to have played the older titles. A huge number of players will play Horizon 5 as their first game, for example. They therefore will either be blissfully unaware that they're paying for old content and receiving recycled cars in updates, or they don't care because it's new to them. Either way, updates are getting worse in racing games. I can't speak for other genres, but it's probably a similar story in most games these days. They used to only add new content, albeit less frequently, but it was at least new. We used to be happy with games that had no updates, so maybe we shouldn't expect new content as often as it's promised to us these days. So it is great that developers add new stuff. We should be grateful for any content they add which is new, because we never used to get updates. And I love an update full of new content. The problem is telling us it's an update full of new content when it's reskinned versions of a thing we already have, or straight up copy and paste of recycled old content from previous games. Add it all at launch and add new stuff as and when you can. Don't add new stuff for the sake of it, or you'll end up running out of ideas and adding recycled content as Forza do. So like I say, I'm in no way defending these games, but we shouldn't care if games don't have updates as frequently with less content, but we should care when they promise new content and then instead give us old content and lie to us about it being brand new. It may seem like this is just a long repetitive rant about racing games, mostly Forza, and it kind of is, but you may be thinking that I dislike that game. I don't. The amount I play it shows I must enjoy it, at least to a certain extent. They do add new content, which I love to see. I love trying it when it gets added, and I'm pleased when we do get actually new stuff. Any new content is a welcome addition, and we should be pleased when we get any. It's the filling it out with old content that's the problem, which I've probably repeated many times at this point. Add all the content at the launch and leave the new content for later. We'll then be excited for each time there is an update, and we'll know it's actually new. At the moment, I'm not even looking forward to the next update, because I'm expecting exactly the same thing to continue. So, all we can really do is just ignore the recycled content. Win it if you want, it's not that hard to get hold of, pretend it was always there. It's not like it takes much to win it, or buy it, depending on which game you're playing, and be happy with anything that is actually new that's added. Just try and imagine they haven't promised that, because that's the problem, is when they promise new content constantly and then don't add it. Just try and imagine they didn't do that and that the cars were there at launch. I know that's not really a solution, and we shouldn't let these racing game developers off the hook. Do make your thoughts known and shout at them until they sort this problem out, because I really do hope this trend of adding as many updates as possible, however bad and lazily made they are, ends soon. Although unfortunately, I can see this going on and on and on. Developers, just end this habit. You must know how much of your communities are getting increasingly annoyed about it, and, well, the problem is, they're not annoyed enough to stop buying the games, which means the developers keep doing it. But anyway, what we want is a smaller number of updates of higher quality with more effort put into them. It would be a far better way round than adding monthly content which is just old or not interesting. Add high quality updates as and when you can, but less frequently than we're getting them at the moment. Then at least when they do come around, it will be new content and we'll all be excited to give it a go, and the games will be better for it, I think. Anyway, for now, do let me know what you think. Do you agree with what I've said in this video? Do you think we should be getting monthly updates with all new stuff? Or do you think Forza are doing a good enough job with adding what they're adding at the moment? Be interesting to hear any opinions, either agreeing with me or disagreeing with me. But yeah, for now that is going to be all. I really hope these updates improve going forwards. It's looking like the winter one might just be a copy and paste of last year's update, but let's hope it's not. For now then, that is going to be all, so thank you very much for watching, and I will be back with the next video very soon.